The polished wood of the mantelpiece felt cool and solid beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the tremor in my hands. It was the 3rd anniversary of Mark's passing, a day that for me was etched in stone, a permanent fixture in the calendar of my heart. For my daughter-in-law, Jessica, it seemed to be a mere inconvenience. She stood across the living room, scrolling through her phone, a sigh of impatience escaping her lips, as I placed a fresh photo of my son next to a vase of his favorite white lilies. The scent filled the room, a ghostly perfume of memory and sorrow. "Are we almost done with this, Carol?" she asked, not looking up. Her voice was clipped, polished just like the rest of her. "The caterers for the party will be here soon, and I don't want the place looking like a shrine." A shrine, that's what she called my quiet tribute to her late husband, my only son. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes, the hot rush of grief and anger that I had learned to swallow down like a bitter pill. 3 years, and it hadn't gotten any easier to be around her. "It's just one picture, Jessica," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's his day." She finally looked at me, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising in that way that made me feel small and foolish. "Don't be dramatic," she said, the words sharp and dismissive, each one a tiny paper cut on my already wounded soul. "Mark wouldn't want you moping around. He'd want us to be happy, to celebrate life." She gestured vaguely around her pristine, minimalist living room, the one she and Mark had bought, the one I had helped them secure the down payment for. "That's why I'm throwing this get-together. It's about moving forward, moving forward." For her, that meant erasing the past. For me, the past was all I had left of him. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The years of quiet endurance, of biting my tongue, of allowing her to repaint the narrative of my son's life to fit her perfect, glossy world, it all crumbled. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My grief wasn't a performance, it wasn't drama, it was the crushing, silent weight of a mother's love with nowhere to go, and in that instant, I knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore. More than that, she needed to carry her part. She needed to know the truth of the man she claimed to love, the truth he had hidden from her to protect her, or perhaps to protect himself. My hand, no longer trembling but steady with a cold resolve, went to my handbag resting on the armchair. Inside, nestled within a worn leather-bound journal, was the letter, his last letter, the one he wrote to me, not to her, in the week before the accident. I walked towards her, my steps measured and deliberate on the plush grey carpet. Her face registered mild annoyance, expecting another plea or a tearful remonstration. She was wrong. I stopped in front of her, holding the folded, cream-colored pages. "You think I'm being dramatic, Jessica?" I asked, my voice low and clear. "You think you know what Mark wanted?" I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed the letter into her perfectly manicured hand. "Then you should read this. It's the last thing he ever wrote." Her confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, as she looked down at the familiar, looping handwriting. She didn't recognize it at first, because he had always typed his notes to her, but I knew his hand better than my own. As her eyes scanned the first line, "Dearest Mom," I saw the color drain from her face. I watched as the foundation of her perfectly curated life began to crack, right there in the sterile silence of her immaculate living room. Jessica stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her knuckles were white where she gripped it. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator from the open-plan kitchen and the distant drone of a lawnmower outside. She looked up at me. Her eyes, usually so hard and assured, were now wide with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice losing its polished edge for the first time. "You're trying to ruin today, aren't you? You can't stand that I'm moving on, that I'm happy." I just shook my head slowly, feeling an odd sense of calm settle over me. The storm that had been raging inside me for 3 years was finally breaking. It's not a joke, Jessica. It's his final letter. He gave it to me 4 days before the crash. He made me promise not to share it unless I felt I absolutely had to. For 3 years, I've honored that. I've watched you build this fiction around your marriage, around him, and I've said nothing. But I won't be called dramatic for grieving my son in my own way, not anymore. Her gaze dropped back to the letter. She ran a thumb over his name, written in his own hand. It was real. She couldn't deny the handwriting, the specific way he looped his cap. I saw the subtle shift in her posture, the slight slump of her shoulders as the reality began to sink in. She had built a fortress around herself since his death, a fortress of stoic resilience that bordered on coldness. She called it strength. I saw it as denial. She had hosted parties, gone on trips, and redesigned the house, systematically purging every trace of the man who had lived and breathed in these walls, except for the single professionally framed photo on her nightstand. I think she loved the idea of him more than the man himself. Mark had been gentle, artistic, and a little bit lost. He was a musician who ended up in finance to afford the life Jessica envisioned for them. He traded his beloved, beat-up acoustic guitar for spreadsheets and conference calls. I saw the light dim in his eyes over the years, a gradual fading that I, his mother, couldn't ignore, but that his wife seemed completely oblivious to. Jessica sank into a sleek, white armchair that probably cost more than my first car. Her hands trembled now, mirroring mine from moments before. She unfolded the 2 pages, the crisp paper crinkling loudly in the silence. Her eyes began to move, scanning the lines of ink that held my son's final thoughts. I didn't need to read it. I had long ago committed it to memory. Every word was burned into my mind. "Dearest Mom," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the courage to say it all to your face, or worse, something has happened. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, and every path looks dark. I know I haven't been myself lately. I see the worry in your eyes when you come over for dinner, even when I'm smiling and telling you everything's fine. It's not fine, Mom. It hasn't been for a long time." I watched Jessica's breath hitch. Her carefully constructed mask of indifference was beginning to shatter. She was reading the words of a stranger, a man she thought she knew better than anyone. "This life I'm living, it feels like a costume. The suit, the high-pressure job, the endless cycle of earnings and spending. It's not me. I did it for her, Mom. I did it all for Jessica. I love her, or at least, I love the woman I thought she was when we first met. The girl who loved dive bar bands and paint-splattered jeans. But that girl is gone. In her place is a woman who measures success in square footage and brand names, and I'm suffocating trying to keep up." I could see Jessica's chest rising and falling rapidly. She was shaking her head in a tiny, almost imperceptible motion of denial. I turned away, giving her a semblance of privacy, and walked to the large picture window that overlooked her manicured lawn. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in this room. I remembered the day Mark gave me the letter. He'd shown up at my small house, his eyes hollowed out with exhaustion. He looked thin, worn down to the bone. He'd handed me the envelope and said, "Just keep this for me, Mom. Please don't read it unless you feel you have to. It's my insurance policy, I guess, for my sanity." 4 days later, his car skidded off a rain-slicked highway on his way home from a business trip he never wanted to take. The police said he likely fell asleep at the wheel. For 3 years I wondered if it was an accident. The letter made me question everything. The next part of the letter was the one I knew would gut her. "I'm in trouble, Mom. Deep trouble. The bonuses at work weren't as big as I let on, and I made some bad investments trying to catch up, trying to fund this life she wants. We're in debt. A lot of it. She has no idea. She just keeps planning. The kitchen remodel, the trip to Italy, the charity gala tickets. Every time I try to talk to her about money, she waves a hand and says, 'You'll figure it out. You always do.' She doesn't see the pressure. She doesn't see that I'm drowning." Jessica made a small choked sound. I risked a glance back at her. Her face was pale, her lipstick a garish slash of color against her ashen skin. Her eyes were glued to the page, a horror story unfolding in her own husband's handwriting. She was finally seeing the man behind the curtain, the one who wasn't a financial wizard, but a desperate man trying to hold on. "I'm thinking of leaving," the letter continued. "Not just the job, everything. I have a fantasy of just getting in my car and driving west, finding a small town where no one knows my name, and just playing music in a bar for tips. Maybe that's pathetic, maybe it's cowardly, but it's the only thought that brings me any peace." I don't know how to tell her. How do you tell someone that the life they love is the very thing that's destroying you? How do you admit that you've been living a lie for years? I don't want to hurt her, Mom, but I'm hurting so much more. I feel so utterly alone in my own home. You are the only one who still sees me, the real me. I love you for that. Please don't think badly of me for this. I just need a way out. Your son, Mark. A single tear finally escaped and rolled down Jessica's cheek, tracing a path through her expensive foundation. It was followed by another, and another. The letter fell from her limp fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared blankly at the far wall, at a piece of abstract art she'd paid a small fortune for, a swirl of angry black and grey lines that suddenly seemed to perfectly capture the chaos that had just been unleashed in her heart. The caterers would be here soon. Her friends would arrive, expecting champagne and light chatter, but the party was over before it had even begun. The ghost at the feast was no longer just my son, it was the truth, and it had finally come home. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken accusations and shattered illusions. Jessica didn't move, she just sat there, frozen in her designer armchair, her face a canvas of raw, unfiltered shock. The perfectly coiffed, unshakable woman I had known for the better part of a decade was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone vulnerable and utterly broken. Slowly she bent down and picked up the letter, her movements stiff and robotic. She smoothed it out on her lap, her eyes tracing the words again, as if hoping they might rearrange themselves into a different story, a happier one. But the ink was permanent, the words were his. The truth was immutable. Finally she looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a maelstrom of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was a profound, gut-wrenching pain. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you wait 3 years to show me this? You let me believe. You let me think everything was perfect." The accusation stung, but I stood my ground. "Because he asked me to, Jessica," I said softly, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "He was my son. His last wish was for me to protect his memory, to protect you from this pain, unless it became necessary. For 3 years, I watched you grieve in your own way. I didn't agree with it, but it was your way. But when you called my grief dramatic, when you tried to erase him for the sake of a party, that's when it became necessary. You needed to understand what he was carrying. You needed to know that his life with you wasn't the fairy tale you told yourself it was." "A fairy tale," she shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. "I loved him. We were happy. Were you?" I challenged gently. "Or were you just comfortable? Did you ever ask him if he was happy? Did you ever look past the paycheck and the promotions to see the man who was fading away right in front of your eyes?" I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the photo I had placed there. It was Mark at 22, long hair, a wide, genuine grin, holding his first decent guitar. This was the man I knew, the man who could find joy in a simple song, the man who dreamed of art, not assets. "Did you even know that man, Jessica, or did you only meet the one he became for you?" Her face crumpled, the question hit its mark. She looked from the photo in my hand to the letter in her lap, connecting the two versions of Mark for the first time. The bright, hopeful boy, and the desperate, broken man. "The debt," she murmured, her mind finally latching onto the tangible part of the disaster. "He told me the investments were doing great. He just bought me that new car for my birthday 6 months before." Her voice trailed off as the realization dawned. The car hadn't been a symbol of their success. It had been an act of desperation, another piece of the facade he was struggling to maintain. "How bad is it?" she asked, looking at me as if I held all the answers. I don't know the exact figures, I admitted. He was always private about the details, but I know he took out a second mortgage on this house. He mentioned it once, in passing. He said it was for a market opportunity. I didn't understand at the time. I do now. Her eyes darted around the room, no longer seeing a beautiful home but a cage of debt, a monument to a lie she had unknowingly co-authored. The kitchen remodel she had planned, the Italian vacation, it was all a fantasy built on a foundation of sand. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. A wave of fury washed over her face, eclipsing the grief. It wasn't directed at me anymore, it was for him. He lied to me, she seethed, crumpling the letter in her fist. For years he lied to my face every single day. He let me believe we were a team, that we were building a life together, but we weren't. He was living a secret life, resenting me, blaming me. He wasn't blaming you, Jessica, I interjected, trying to defend him. Even now, he was blaming himself. He felt he had failed you. He wrote in that letter that he loved you. He just didn't know how to be the man he thought you wanted him to be. The man I wanted him to be, she scoffed, standing up and beginning to pace the room like a caged animal. I wanted a husband, a partner, not some martyr who smiled while he was secretly planning to abandon me. Leaving, he was going to just disappear. The raw betrayal in her voice was palpable. Her grief had been for the perfect husband she had lost. Now that grief was being poisoned by the revelation that the man she was mourning never truly existed. He was a construct, a performance, and the performance had killed him. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime sounding obscene in the funereal atmosphere of the room. We both froze. The caterers. Jessica stared at the door, her face a mask of panic. Her perfect party, her statement to the world that she was strong and moving on, was about to walk through the door. "Send them away," I said quietly. "Tell them it's been cancelled. A family emergency." She looked at me, her eyes wild. "And what do I tell my friends? Everyone is expecting." "Tell them the truth," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "Or at least a version of it. Tell them you're not up to it. Tell them today is harder than you expected. For once, just be honest." The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. For a moment I thought she would ignore it, that she would retreat back into her fortress of denial. But then, something shifted in her eyes. The panic receded, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out resignation. She walked the front door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I heard the lock click open, and her voice, strained and thin, speaking to the catering staff. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of finality. A few moments later, the door closed, and she leaned her forehead against it, her body shaking with silent sobs. The party was officially over. The long, painful process of facing the truth had just begun. In the days that followed, a strange, unspoken truce settled between us. The house, once a stage for Jessica's perfect life, became a quiet, somber space of shared, if conflicting, grief. The friends who called to see why the party was cancelled were given a vague excuse. The world was kept at bay. Jessica moved through the rooms like a ghost, her usual vibrant energy completely extinguished. She didn't talk much at first. She would just sit with the letter and a box of old photo albums, trying to reconcile the smiling man in the pictures with the despairing one who had penned those final words. I gave her space, staying in the guest room, making coffee in the morning, and ensuring there was food she could eat, though she barely touched it. It was a role reversal I never expected. I, the grieving mother, was now tending to the shattered wife. About a week after the revelation, I found her in Mark's old office. It was the one room she hadn't completely changed. She had cleared out his personal papers, but left his books and a few of his university awards on the shelves. Now, she was going through the desk drawers, pulling out old bank statements and credit card bills that had been tucked away. Her face was grim, her jaw set with determination. "You were right," she said, without looking up at me. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. The second mortgage, I found the paperwork. It was taken out 8 months before he died. She tossed a file onto the desk. And this, it was a stack of credit card statements, addressed to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. The balances were staggering. Thousands upon thousands spent on things I knew were in the house. The new patio furniture, the top-of-the-line television, her own designer clothes. All bought on credit, a frantic shuffling of debt to maintain an illusion. He was paying one card off with another, she said, her voice a dead whisper. A house of cards, a complete and utter house of cards. She finally looked at me, her eyes searching mine. Did you know how bad it was? I knew he was stressed, I said honestly. I knew the job was wearing on him. But I didn't know the specifics. He was too proud. He didn't want his mother to see him struggling. He probably felt the same way about you. No, she said, shaking her head. It wasn't the same. He didn't want me to see because he was afraid I would, what? Leave him? Think less of him? She laughed, a short, bitter sound. The stupid thing is, I wouldn't have. If he had just told me we were in trouble, we could have figured it out. We could have downsized. I would have gotten a job. I would have done anything, but he never gave me the choice. He just decided for me that I was this shallow person who only cared about things. And there it was, the core of her anger and her pain. It wasn't just the lie, it was the assumption behind it. He had typecast her in his own tragedy as the materialistic wife, and he had never given her a chance to prove him wrong. Whether she had become that person or not was a question she now had to ask herself, but he had made the judgment for her. He loved you, Jessica, I said, feeling the need to defend him again. He was just lost. He didn't know how to ask for help. Love, she shot back, her voice rising. Is it love to sentence yourself to misery, to buy your wife a new handbag? Is it love to lie every day and then write a letter about how you want to run away? That's not love, Carol, it's cowardice. And I have to live with the fact that my husband died, possibly because he fell asleep driving home from a job he hated to pay for a life he resented, all because he was too much of a coward to have one honest conversation with me. The word coward hung in the air between us. It was cruel, but I couldn't entirely disagree with it. Mark had made choices. He had chosen silence over honesty, sacrifice over communication. But I also knew the immense pressure he had been under, a pressure that was both self-imposed and subtly reinforced by the world around him, including Jessica. I didn't say that, though. It wasn't the time. She needed to be angry. The anger was a shield, protecting her from the crushing weight of the grief and the guilt that was sure to follow. The next few weeks were a painful excavation of their life together. Jessica became an archaeologist of their finances, digging through years of statements and receipts. With every new discovery, a secret loan, a maxed-out credit card, a piece of her memory of their happy marriage crumbled to dust. She learned that their lavish honeymoon was never fully paid off, that the diamond earrings he gave her for their anniversary were bought with a cash advance. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the floor of their walk-in closet, surrounded by her beautiful, expensive clothes, shoes and bags. She was crying, not the loud, angry sobs of before, but a deep, silent, mournful weeping. "It's all blood money, isn't it?" she whispered, touching the sleeve of a silk blouse. "Every piece of this, it's what he killed himself for." I sat down on the floor beside her, amidst the trappings of a life that now seemed grotesque. "He didn't kill himself, Jessica," I said gently. "It was an accident, was it?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "In the letter he said he wanted a way out. The police said he might have fallen asleep, but what if he just let go of the wheel? What if he was so tired of it all that he just closed his eyes and let it happen?" It was the question that had haunted me for 3 years, the one I pushed to the darkest corner of my mind. Hearing it from her lips gave it a terrible new life. We sat there in silence, two women bound by our love for one man, now forced to confront the ugliest of possibilities, that his death wasn't just a tragedy, but a choice. The silence wasn't empty, it was filled with the shared horror of that thought. And in that shared horror, for the very first time, we weren't mother and daughter-in-law. We were just two people who had loved Mark, mourning not only his death, but the life he had been too afraid to live. The seasons began to turn, and with them, something in the Cold War between Jessica and me began to thaw. The raw anger and recriminations gave way to a quiet, shared sadness. The process of dismantling the financial wreckage of Mark's secret life forced us into an unlikely partnership. We spent hours on the phone with banks, with credit card companies, with lawyers. I helped her sort through the mountain of paperwork, my steady, methodical nature, a counterbalance to her frayed emotional state. In these moments, we weren't fighting over Mark's memory, we were working to protect what little was left of his legacy. She made the decision to sell the house. It was a painful one, but necessary. "I can't live here anymore," she told me one evening, as we looked over a real estate agent's proposal. "Every room feels like a lie. I look at the countertops I wanted so badly, and all I can think about is the secret loan he took out to pay for them." The process of selling the house was a process of letting go piece by piece. Jessica was ruthless. She sold the designer furniture, the abstract art, the luxury car. She kept only a few sentimental items, a collection of old vinyl records they had bought together in college, a worn armchair he used to love sitting in, and the photos. The rest she sold, using every penny to pay down the mountains of debt he had left behind. I watched in quiet amazement as a new Jessica emerged. The woman who had once measured her worth in material possessions was now finding a strange liberation in getting rid of them. It was as if by shedding the physical remnants of their life, she was also shedding the person she had become. One rainy Saturday, we were packing up the last of the books from his office. I came across his old beat-up acoustic guitar, tucked away in the back of a closet. It was the one from the photo, the one he had before the world convinced him he needed something more. I pulled it out. A string was broken, and it was covered in a thick layer of dust. "I thought he sold this years ago," I said, more to myself than to her. Jessica came over and ran her hand over the worn wood. "No," she said softly. "He told me he did, but I found it back here a few months after we moved in. When I asked him about it, he just got this strange, sad look on his face and said he couldn't bring himself to part with it. He said, 'It's the last piece of the real me.' I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was just sentimental." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just grief or anger, but a profound understanding. He was leaving me breadcrumbs, wasn't he? Clues to how he really felt, and I was too busy, too self-absorbed to see them. After the house was sold, Jessica moved into a small, modest apartment in a less fashionable part of the city. It was a world away from her old life, but she seemed more at peace there than I had ever seen her in the grand, empty mansion. She got a job working at a local art gallery. The pay was a fraction of what Mark used to make in a month, but her eyes had a light in them I hadn't seen since she and Mark were first dating. I would visit her sometimes, bringing groceries or just to sit and have tea. Our conversations were different now. We talked about Mark, but we talked about the real Mark. We shared stories of his goofy sense of humor, his kindness, his passion for music. We acknowledged his flaws, his fears, and the tragic choices he made. We were no longer competing to own his memory, but sharing it. On the 4th anniversary of his death, 1 year after I had given her the letter, she called me. "Will you come with me to the cemetery?" she asked. It was the first time she had ever suggested going together. When I arrived at her apartment, she was holding a small potted sapling. "I thought we could plant it," she said. "Something that will grow, something new." We stood before his grave, the air crisp with the scent of autumn. The stone was simple, just his name, and the dates. We worked together, digging a small hole in the earth beside the headstone. As we placed the young tree in the ground, Jessica turned to me, her eyes clear. "Thank you, Carol," she said. I was taken aback. "For what?" "For giving me the letter," she said, her voice steady. "It was the cruelest, kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. It destroyed the life I thought I had, but it gave me the chance to build a real one." She reached out and squeezed my hand, "And thank you for not giving up on him, or on me." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in 4 years, they weren't tears of pure sorrow. They were tears of release, of a complicated, messy and ultimately profound love. We had both lost Mark, but in the ruins of his secrets, we had found something else, a sliver of truth, a measure of peace, and an unlikely, unbreakable bond. We stood there for a long time, 2 women, a gravestone, and a newly planted tree, watching as the wind rustled its leaves, like a final gentle whisper of a song. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.